أهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي، أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر عبر WNZK راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Join me on the third Friday of each month at 8 AM Eastern Standard Time. I'll be discussing some of the most important current political, economic, and social issues in my program, The Bridge. On Radio Baladi, on America's Voice of the Arab, WNZK 690 AM, and WZMZ 700 AM.
Good morning, everybody. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, Associate Professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Maryland and an expert on Arab and Muslim media. We are discussing today a very timely topic, media responsibility in the wake of the Paris attacks, lessons and reflections. The devastating news about the terror attacks, which took place in Paris last week, shocked the whole world, as they have been described as the worst terror attacks in France since the end of World War II. They led to closing France's borders and were described by some analysts as a second 9/11 due to their massive impact and negative ramifications. One important aspect of the aftermath of these deadly attacks has been the magnitude, size, and type of media coverage they have been receiving in international media forums. This requires a discussion of the patterns, frames, biases, and prejudices which could be detected in this style of international media coverage and reporting, including the discrepancy in focusing on certain terror attacks but not others, the angle of coverage and the frame of coverage, the lack of sufficient representation of Arab and Muslim voices in international media, and the possible changes and remedies which are needed to ensure a more balanced, fair, and equitable coverage of similar events in the future. With me this morning discussing this important topic is experienced journalist and media analyst and commentator, Mr. Ray Hanania. Mr. Hanania is a Palestinian-American journalist who has many years' experience in the field of media and communication. He worked in so many different media places, including the prominent Al Jazeera English, and he is also a member of our U.S. Arab radio team as he presents his own monthly radio show on the second Friday of each month. Welcome to the program, Ray.
Hey, how are you, Sahar?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
No, I'm happy to be there, and I'm very honored that you'd invite me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So let's start with the coverage of the Paris attacks in terms of the general frame that has been adopted and also the angle of coverage. I mean, what did the media choose to focus on in covering this particular attacks, and what did they choose not to cover? Was there some kind of blind spot? Was there some kind of neglected aspects in the pattern and frame of coverage?
Well, I think that many people, especially in the Arab and Muslim world, recognized right away that there was a difference between the way the Western media covered the attacks in Paris and the way the same Western media covered the terrorist attacks in Beirut, in Sinai against the Russian plane. There was, and this is not a new phenomena, but it's been something that's been ongoing for many, many years. And the difference is very simple. When the Western media focuses on a Western victim of Arab, quote-unquote, Arab or Muslim terrorism, they tend to focus on the human aspect of the victims. Mm-hmm. When the violence has to do with, or the terrorism targets Arabs or Muslims, it's seen as if it's part of our culture, and one, not a shock, and two, they tend to cover it as a political, story rather than a human story, a human tragedy. So when you look at how the Western media covers Paris, you see a lot of empathy, sympathy, because we're looking at images of people. The focus is on the people who were out partying. They were civilians. They didn't have anything to do with the conflict. When they focus on the Arabs, it's almost as if they treat the Arabs as if we are part of the conflict. We're combatants, and we're not human beings. And they don't talk about, sometimes they don't even say what our names are. They just say, the Arab victims, statistics, 100 people were killed. That's a very stark distinction between how the two are covered.
I think you touched on a number of very important points here, Ray. The humanization and personification of the character of the victim, who he or she is. He was a father, this is how old he was, he was watching the movie, or he was in the theater having dinner. All of these human aspects are oftentimes missing when we're talking about victims in the Arab and Muslim world, absolutely. And also, let me tell you that one of my students was like, was there even a terrorist attack? Was there an attack in Beirut? He did not know about the events that happened in Beirut, Lebanon, just shortly before Paris happened. So that was, again, something that was not, widely talked about or discussed in the media. Absolutely, I totally agree with you on these points. Tell me, do you personally see this as another or a second 9/11? Some people called it this way in the media. Do you think this is an overstatement or an exaggeration?
Well, I think it's an overstatement in response to the overwhelming empathy in the West. So the more humanized the victims, the more emotional the West becomes. Oh, this is a Holocaust. Oh, this is 9/11. And you know that in another debate, if we were to say that, for example, the Israeli mistreatment of Palestinians was a Holocaust, we would be attacked. But because it's such a humanized perspective when they're dealing with the Paris attacks, a Western target, there's this feeling that they can go to any limit to express their emotion. But, this is where I always get in trouble, because part of the distinction, I believe, now it's easy for us, and I've read all the different Arab media, many of them have picked up on the fact that there is this really unfair difference, and they blame it all on racism, which I agree is a major driving force. They don't see Arabs and Muslims as human beings. They're racist against us in the West. That's how they look at us. But I also believe a major burden and part of the problem falls on the shoulders of the Arab and Muslim people, the Arab and Muslim media, and especially the Arab and Muslim governments. We tend to politicize the story. We tend to make it about politics because we have been conditioned over years of tyranny and dictatorships and oppression, not having a free media, to accept the political interpretation of events and to ignore the much more powerful human aspect of a act of violence like this. So Sahar, how many, do you remember the Paris scene, right? Where they attacked the people at the rock concert at the Bataclan Theater. Thousands of Parisians, and including some Arabs, by the way, and Muslims, placed flowers, candles, signs, pictures. The police guarded it. How many people went to the Burj-el Barajna camp, which is a neighborhood of Beirut, where unknown numbers of Palestinians, I think it was like 41 civilians were killed and 180 were injured. How many people went to the scene of those attacks, for example, as Arabs, and placed flowers, balloons, pictures, and candles expressing and addressing the human aspect? We are kind of partially responsible for the very difference that we're upset about. And also another important point that's related to this whole discussion, Ray, in my opinion, is when an attack happens on Muslim or Arab victims, there's always some kind of justification in most media platforms internationally for the aggressors or the attackers, who oftentimes do not
get the hate crime label or the terrorist label. Take, for example, the case of the 3 Palestinian Americans who were actually shot in the head in North Carolina in a very brutal and very unhuman attack. And, we saw all of these justifications in the media saying, maybe it was a parking dispute. They were at the wrong place at the wrong time. They were actually in their homes. You cannot be at the wrong place if you are inside your home. And there are always justifications for, for example, this person is insane or having a mental disorder. If the attacker is non-Muslim and if the victim is a Muslim, we don't see the hate crime or the terrorist label being attached to the attacker. Would you like to comment a little bit on this particular aspect, which I believe is equally troubling?
Yes, it is. That's another pattern, but it comes out of this difference in approach. And remember, the fundamental difference is this. And if we understand this, then we can address it and change it. The fundamental difference is when the West approaches their victims, it's a coverage of humanity. When the West approaches the Arab victims and Muslim victims, in other words, when we are victims in Iraq, when we are victims in Palestine, when we are victims in Syria even, we're viewed as a political component of a bigger political story. And when it's political, it's less emotional. So, and you take the emotion out, the humanity, and suddenly there's no feeling whatsoever. That extends over to very horrible acts of racism and hate here in the United States, like the incident that you just described, where a gunman pulled out a gun, and because he was quote unquote angry over a parking place, he went to the Muslim Arab neighbor's home, shot the husband, then came out and shot the wife and her sister. And the media treated it like, there was some, oh my gosh, this is an act of racism, but it's not American racism. It's this individual. They narrow it, they box it, and they focus just on the killer. And they say, oh, he's a lone gunman. He's not a terrorist. It's not, he doesn't, in other words, represent the rising hate and racism that really exists in this country that Americans don't want to acknowledge.
Even, I think, declaring the identity of the attacker. Like, you don't get the word, a Christian, killer or murderer or attacker or, Jewish, but you get, a Muslim person attacked or a Muslim person killed or a Muslim person is a terrorist. The attachment of the attacker's identity and a religious identity in particular, an ethnic and racial identity, is oftentimes focused upon clearly in the media when the attacker happens to be a Muslim or an Arab, but we don't see vice versa. Would you also agree with this point, and what does it mean?
Well, I think, and again, this is where I think, again, I get in trouble with the pro-Israel crowd now. I think a lot of this distinction stems from the manipulative way Israel has presented the Palestine-Israel conflict to the American people. Israel sees that, and they recognize that the more they talk about Islam and Muslims, the more Americans become fearful. So you've noticed, especially over the last 10 years, that Israeli leaders, in responding to their murderous atrocities against Palestinian civilians, for example, that they're putting it in the context of they killed terrorists who are aligned with Al-Qaeda and Islamic Jihad and Hamas, and they blend it all together, even though everybody knows that regardless of how you feel about Hamas, Hamas is nothing compared to Al-Qaeda. Hamas is not anti-American. Hamas is not a terrorist organization that's out to just kill people. It's a much more militant resistance organization, maybe, than people may or may not want. But the Israelis have created a formula that extends now to the entire Middle East. Because when we saw the disruption in Iraq, and it started there in 2003, when we invaded Iraq illegally, the Israelis were with us, and they were helping to define how they were going to present the justification for the many atrocities and massacres that occurred in Iraq, and then that carried over into Syria today, where we see hundreds of thousands, millions of civilians, innocent civilians, who are being just cast aside as if they're meaningless. And it makes it very hard when we've been conditioned to interpret these events based on this Israeli-driven premise, which benefits Israel politically in terms of the war to get American minds. Now, there's so many problems here and factors, and the most important is this. The Israelis recognize that America is the biggest and most important audience, and we are part of the West.
Let's get to these problems, Ray, after the commercial break. We'll have to take a commercial break right now. So let's talk about these problems right after the commercial break, please. Stay tuned.
Sounds good.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
Life for Relief and Development is a nonprofit charity that has been providing humanitarian aid and development to people and communities regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background for over 22 years. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life rushes to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Life also has development projects that provide medical relief, water purification, educational programs, relief for orphans, and much more. Your help and support can greatly improve these efforts. All donations are tax deductible. For more information, please visit our website at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's lifeusa.org, 248-424-7493. It's never too early to get your child on the right track. From their first words to first grade, Dreamy Children's Center in Troy works closely with parents to provide an experience that goes beyond early education. The highly qualified and experienced staff use a variety of programs that can help nurture important personality traits like responsibility, independence, problem solving, motivation, and respect. They also have educational programs ranging from preschooling for infants, toddlers, transitional toddlers, and pre-K to Montessori-approved programs and bilingual curriculums for young children. They're open from 6 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., can provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner with snacks in between, and can also arrange for after-school pickup. Dreamy Children's Center in Troy is located at 37373 DeQuinder, just above 16 Mile Road, and can be found on Facebook at Dreamy Children's Center. Ask about the free preschool program. Call today, 248-680-9170, 248-680-9170.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Join me on the third Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be discussing some of the most important current political, economic, and social issues in my program, The Bridge. On Radio Baladi, on America's Voice of the Arab, WNZK 690 AM and WZMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. We are discussing today media responsibility in the wake of the Paris attacks, lessons, and reflections. And with me this morning discussing this important topic is veteran journalist and media commentator and analyst Ray Hanania. Ray, before going to the break, you were talking about Israel's role in all of this in terms of certain problems that you wanted to highlight and pinpoint, and we had to interrupt for the commercial break. So if you can just talk about these number of problems that you wanted to highlight.
Yeah, I mean, basically what I was saying now, obviously, I'm not blaming Israel for the acts of violence. What I'm blaming Israel for is the inordinate influence that they have over the American people, and the way that they've managed to manipulate these incidents to benefit them in terms of their political agenda. The Israelis recognize that America is the most important audience. And as somebody who probably understands communication, Sahar, because many in the Arab community, to them and the Muslim community, communications is merely like a tool. But to me, it's a profession and a science, and I think that you recognize the power of communications. In communications, the most important thing besides the message is who is your audience. And many times the Arab world doesn't define the audience and message. They're not congruous, they're incongruous. So the goal is, and the Israelis understand this masterfully, that the most important audience is the American public, and everything they do speaks to the American public, because the American public defines the events as we see over the last 15 to 20 years. The events of the Middle East are defined by the United States today. And Israel has taken that and applied it to their agenda, and it's spread. So when Americans look at anything now through this looking glass that the Israelis have created for their interests, we now apply it almost to everything. So we look at Paris, and suddenly people are saying, oh, Paris and Israel, are suffering. Look at that. Nobody says, wait a minute, we've abused the people in Syria and Iraq. Nobody sees that. They start identifying, and that's Israel's goal, to identify with the humanized victims and separate themselves from the politicization of this conflict. So we Arabs, there is an answer to this, and we can talk about this later, I think, but it kind of evolved naturally. Israel has a propaganda headlock on the minds of Americans, and we need to address it and correct it. If we want to change things in Syria, if we want to change things in Iraq, if we want to change things in terms of other countries where the United States and Israel's interests have really oppressed, the Arab and Muslim people. We need to see this in a bigger context. But, as you know, Sahar, it's too easy to be emotional when you're an Arab, and we just get angry, and they turn this argument into blaming Israel for everything. I don't blame the Israelis. I see it as a strategy on their part, and we need to strategize and develop a similar strategy to counter what they're doing.
And, this brings to a very important point, Trey, because I really want to also focus on the responsibility of the Arabs and Muslims in producing different narratives, different strategies, and different types of media content. And that's very important because I personally believe that for a long, long, long time, we Arabs and Muslims have been talking to ourselves. We did not succeed so far to really address international public opinion or American public opinion, like you said. What are some of the reasons why we have not really achieved success in this important aspect of knowing how to address international public opinion and American public opinion?
Well, I think the first problem has to do with the politics of the Arab and Muslim community. So, for example, Syria is a perfect example of how the Arab and Muslim community has failed to become a potent force to answer the problems that are taking place there. What has happened in the Arab and Muslim community, not just in the United States, but in the Arab and Muslim world, is that we have divided into two groups, where it's become a religious political conflict between the Shia and the Sunni, between the pro-Hezbollah and pro-Iran groups and the anti-Assad groups. We've turned it into an argument about defending or attacking Bashar al-Assad. And we don't get to the point where we can make it a humanity crisis so that Americans will pour their hearts out in support of the victims of the conflict. And the Americans easily pick up on the confusion of our politics, and they use it as an excuse not to do what's needed to be done. So in Detroit is a good example. You have two confrontational sides there. One, to them, the issue is do you support Bashar al-Assad or do you oppose Bashar al-Assad? The reality should be that Bashar al-Assad should be insignificant, whether he is there or not. The answer goes beyond him. So he's irrelevant. We should be able to say, let's take him out, let's find a new government, let's just change the way things are happening. And many people don't want change. They want him to stay there because of politics. It's good politics for many people. Many people want him out because of politics. It's good politics for many people. So we lose this aspect of focusing on the humanity that resonates with Americans. The politics doesn't resonate with Americans. Americans don't understand the minutia of the conflicts that Arabs and Muslims have. They see us as one people. I'm a Christian Arab. I don't know how many times people come up to me and say, you Muslims. And I go, well, I'm not a Muslim, I'm a Christian. And they look at me like they're in shock. They can't believe, you're a Christian Muslim? I go, no, I'm a Christian Arab. They're in total shock. So how do we get them to understand our complex political differences when they don't even know the fundamental differences that exist in the Arab and Muslim community? And I'll tell you, I'm proud when people say that I'm a Muslim, because I believe that I believe in the nationalism of Arabs and Muslims, not the individualism that has become the trend today. I identify as a Palestinian Christian only to show that there are Christians involved in the Arab world, and America is a Christian country. It has an impact. But I identify with the nationalism of being Arab and Muslim, and we are one people, and we should stand together as one people, and we should have one goal. But until we get there, our differences will be used to help keep people separate and distract them from the things that need to be done in the Middle East.
Yeah, it's very interesting what you just mentioned, because the first thing I tell my students in my Arab media course at the University of Maryland is not every Arab is a Muslim and not every Muslim is an Arab. And a lot of my students are like, wow, we did not know that. So it's like new information for them, and they really become intrigued by the fact that, there are so many distinctions. And I say, absolutely, you have more than 350 million Arabs, you have more than 1.6 billion Muslims. Of course, there's got to be diversity. In a couple of minutes we have before going to the next commercial break, Ray, I want to focus on this point of politicization. I think it's very interesting how you said that we Arabs tend to politicize the news rather than focusing on the humanitarian aspects. If you can, in a couple of minutes, give us some insight into this particular phenomenon. What does it mean?
Well, what it means is the projection of what concerns us. And in a nutshell, it's basically this. Americans are watching us, and Americans are watching the Israelis. And again, I'm using the Israelis as an example, and I believe that they've been a major influence in how this has been defined. But Americans are watching the Arabs and Muslims, and they see us fighting over politics. They didn't see us, for example, our Arab media did not focus on the people that died in Beirut. 3 Americans were among the 41 who were killed in the terrorist attack in Beirut, and if that had occurred anyplace else, it would have been headlines. But the Arab media failed to present it as a human story. Instead, what they did was, it's an ego thing, because understanding politics is important. Interviewing and presenting the tragedy of human life sometimes isn't that important. Who are the 41 people who died? What were they? What were their names? Where did they live? That the Americans and the West did a great job of portraying individuals killed in Paris at that level. The Arab media has not done that. And that, I think, is one of the most important failures that allows this separation of the way we're treated to take place. We are a big problem. The Arab media and the Arab governments, they don't want the humanization. They want the politics, because the politics generates more money for the Arab media, and the politics protects the Arab dictatorships that really still control the Middle East people.
Absolutely. These are all very important points, and we'll come back again to a further discussion of these points right after this commercial break. Stay tuned.
Jumana K-Ruse. You've seen her images on giant billboards across the metro. Jumana K-Ruse. You've seen her images on buses across the city. Now get to know Jumana K-Ruse.
The war broke out in my home country, Lebanon. I was 11 years old, and I saw a lot of bloodshed and inequality and poverty. You can't grow up in an environment like that and not be affected by it and not want to make a difference. I graduated from Yale University with a master's in ethics. I speak 4 languages. It has always been innate in me fighting for the underdog and trying to do whatever it is I can to make a difference in the world.
Let Jumana K-Ruse protect your rights. Call the law offices of Jumana K-Ruse at 1-866-YOUR-RIGHTS, extension 100, or visit yourrights.com.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Dana, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Join me on the third Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be discussing some of the most important current political, economic, and social issues in my program, The Bridge. On Radio Baladi, on America's Voice of the Arab, WNDK 690 AM and WZMZ 700 AM.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. We are discussing today media responsibility in the wake of the Paris attacks, lessons and reflections. And with me this morning discussing this important and timely topic is experienced journalist and media commentator and analyst, Mr. Ray Hanania. Ray, before going to the break, we're talking about the Arab and Muslim people's responsibility in terms of the type of coverage we are seeing now that dominates international media headlines, the kind of focus and angle that the media is taking. And we're talking about the problem of politicization of the news and information when it comes out of the Arab world. And you mentioned one of the reasons, which is the focus on politics brings more revenue, more money for Arab media, and it somehow serves the dictatorship or the tyrannical regimes in many of the Arab nations. What other reasons can really contribute to this process of politicization and the undermining of the humane type of suffering that is going on in the region, failing to really focus and point out the human part of the suffering?
Well, as you know, I mean, it's an interesting phenomena, the way the Middle East and the Arab and Muslim worlds have evolved. We did not evolve the same way that people in the West did. You know, fighting for freedom, fighting for democracy, free speech, open-mindedness, thinking. We're very intelligent people in the Arab and Muslim world, but the truth is that we've been more oppressed by dictatorships that were set up by the West. And it's ironic, the West, over the history of our lives, at least over the last couple hundred years, their goal has been to control us. They see us as a threat, and what they've done is, in a way, I mean, it's almost a continuation of the battle, the Crusades. from the end of the first millennium. The truth is they found a way to control us by creating dictators and defining our governments and defining who we are and setting us up and forcing us to accept what has become this blueprint for the difference between the way the West is treated and the way the Arab and the Muslim world is treated. So we've bought into it. Our governments have bought into it. Our media, which is struggling to break out, by the way. I'm not saying there aren't some great Arab journalists and great Muslim journalists. There are. There are many. But they're in a war to break out and be true journalists. It's not easy to work for a media that is government controlled. And even our best media have tremendous influences from government. In the United States, we look at the Western media and we say, wait a minute, they're government controlled too, only in the sense of affinity on issues. The government in the United States doesn't tell the New York Times how and what to do. The public is part of the process that pressures the New York Times, for example, to present the stories that they want rather than the stories that a true journalist might write. So it's a different way of manipulating the media. And in the West, they've come up with a very subtle way to manipulate and control the media that they haven't mastered in the Arab and Muslim world. In the Arab and Muslim world, even that's why a lot of people attack me. They go, Ray, why are you blaming everything on the Arabs? I'm not blaming everything on the Arabs. I'm saying that in order to succeed, it's a fundamental premise of human beings that in order to succeed, you have to recognize what your faults are and address those faults and change those faults, and then you become a better person. We tend to look at that as an attack against pride, an attack against our honor. We don't want to compromise. We don't want to recognize faults. So we don't want to do it. We would rather accept the BS that we get from the Arab governments that fits into the bigger agenda, that the West is pushing, and the Arab media is forced to work in that. Now, I know it sounds very complicated, but the truth is that until we stand up and do the right thing, until we as journalists, for example, when Burj al-Barajna was attacked by Al-Qaeda, by Daesh, we should have not only written the politics, we should have assigned reporters to find out who are those 41 innocent victims who died. We should have plastered their faces on the front pages of our newspapers in the Arab and Muslim world, and we didn't do that. And we still don't I know there were 3 Americans that were killed there, but I don't know their names even. It's only because the American media made it into a footnote story, not wanting to make the Beirut bombing a bigger deal than what it really is, because I think the attack in Beirut is part of a political war that's taking place, but at the same time, we need to break it out of that. We need to humanize it. We need to do our jobs. We need to find that emotion and the empathy that exists in the killings. Who were all the victims of the U.S. war in Iraq? We didn't really get into it because we focus mostly on the politics. But when Israel gets in a conflict with Hamas, we kill 6 Israelis, they kill 2,400 civilians, and they take those 6 Israelis and they define each one of them, who they were, what were their lives, what were their losses. They identify them with the American audience, and they build this empathy that is so powerful that reason is even defeated. That when you look at it and say, wait a minute, 500 children were killed in Gaza by the Israeli military, that's not enough to overcome the power of humanizing 6 or 7 Israelis. That really, if we would stop and look at that and understand it, we could change things. But it's not an easy thing to do. It's very hard to get us to change the way we've been doing things. And the way we've been doing things has not been very successful.
Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that there is also a need for a change of mindset, change of attitude, change of approach, which really requires further training and preparation of Arab journalists of the future. I mean, I believe that one of the weaknesses we have in the Arab and Muslim world is the lack of sufficient training and preparation for many of our, new journalists and media people. What could be done in order to fill this particular gap of improving the training and preparation for journalists of the future in the Arab and Muslim world?
Well, I'll tell you what, one of the first questions I get from Arab journalists is, Ray, why are you different? Why don't you be like us? Let's attack Israel and blame them for everything. I don't blame Israel for everything. Why is it that you criticize us? Why don't you criticize the Western media for being racist? Well, I do criticize them for being racist, but I don't believe they're the only reason for our problem. And the answer is, why am I different, is because I was, educated really in an American journalism system. I wasn't educated in an Arab journalism system. I grew up as a city hall reporter in Chicago, which was the biggest political beat in the Midwest. And I covered that for almost 20 years as a political reporter and columnist. I didn't focus on the Middle East. I did write about it, and I have to tell you, every time I wrote about the Middle East and tried to defend the Arabs, the American media would crucify me. They literally went after me. But because I was educated as an American journalist, I was free of the burdens that are imposed on Arab world journalists by their governments. I was free of the burdens that were imposed by Arab society, which is used to a certain way of coverage that I think needs to change. So I was able to evolve in a different way. And I think what we need to do is we need to teach our Arab and Muslim journalists how to cover issues, not the old Arab and Muslim way, but the new, powerful Western way. And you know what? I'm not saying we should idolize the West, but I'm saying that they have mastered the communication strategy that is taking the oppressors and turn the oppressors into the victims. And you know that old Arab saying that we have? It was the first thing I learned as a young Arab in America, that Arabs have the best case but the worst lawyers, and the Israelis have the worst case but the best lawyers. Well, I realize the word isn't lawyers. What the word should be are journalists. The Arabs have the best case but the worst journalists, and the Israelis have the worst case but the best journalists. It's how they present their story. We need to master it, and we haven't done it out of pride, out of shame, out of refusal to recognize fault, and this idea that, Ray, if you can't speak Arabic fluently, you're not really an Arab. That's what people tell me. So, Americans say, Ray, you're a Christian Muslim? And then Arabs look at me and say, Ray, you're not really Palestinian. You're not really Arab. You're an American because you were born there. These are the hurdles that we need to overcome if we're going to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I cannot agree more. These are very important points. We definitely need to address them and to tackle them. We'll come back again to this interesting discussion right after this commercial break. Stay tuned.
قشات ميديترينيان ماركت بإدارة سهر قشات وأولاده يرحبون بالجالية العربية والكلدانية. جميع أنواع المواد الغذائية، البان طازجة، الكرزات والبهارات الطازجة. داخل الأسواق مطعم ميديترينيان شيش كباب يقدم يوميا جميع أنواع الكباب، المقبلات العربية العراقية وصواني الكامبو المميزة. تفتح الأسواق من 8 إلى 9 مساء من الاثنين وحتى السبت، ومن 8 صباحا إلى 9 مساء يوم الأحد. تقع الأسواق على 32839 نورث ويسترن هايوي في مدينة فارمينغتون هيلز. لحوم حلال للجالية الإسلامية. لطلباتكم من المطعم كول 248-538-7855. That is 248-538-7855. قشة ميديترينيان ماركت، خدمة متميزة ومعاملة راقية.
مسافر وحدك وفايتني.
أمتي ترافل للسياحة والسفر بإدارة نبيل الباشا تعلن عن افتتاح مكتبها الواقع على 28695 راين رود في مدينة وورن. خدمات متميزة وخبرة تفوق 20 عاما نضعها في خدمة عملائنا الكرام. مع أميتي ترافل يمكنكم حجز رحلاتكم الجوية داخل أمريكا، الوطن العربي وأنحاء العالم، إضافة إلى الأماكن السياحية والاستجمام. للحصول على أفضل العروض وأنسب الأسعار ولمزيد من المعلومات اتصلوا على الرقم 586-578-9126 586-578-9126. أمتي ترافل، عنوان للصداقة والثقة. أسواق زمزم الواقع على 24065 أورشاد ليك في مدينة فارمington هيلز ترحب بالجالية العربية والكلدانية. تنزيلات كبيرة على عموم المواد الغذائية في يوم الأربعاء من كل أسبوع. لا تنسوا فريش كاري اوت، جميع انواع المعجنات، وايضا صواني الكمبو المشكله والصمون الحار. لحوم حلال الجاليه العربيه والاسلاميه الملحمه باداره قصاب الجاليه المعروف سلوان جربوع. زوروهم على 24065 اورشاد ليك في مدينه فارمington هيلز او اتصلوا بهم على 248-476-0300. اسواق زمزم للمذاقي عنوان لجميع طلباتكم، اتصلوا على 248-476-0300. اسواق زمزم للمعامله الراقية وكرم الضيافة عنوان.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Join me on the third Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be discussing some of the most important current political, economic, and social issues in my program, The Bridge. On Radio Baladi, on America's Voice of the Arab, WNZK 690 AM and WZNZ 700 AM.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. We are discussing today media responsibility in the wake of the Paris attacks, lessons and reflections. And with me this morning discussing this important topic is experienced journalist, media commentator and analyst, Mr. Ray Hanania. Ray, I wanted to also touch upon a very important point in my opinion in terms of part of the weaknesses or problems in Arab and Muslim media's coverage and approach. The emotional overtone, the fact that many media outlets turn into shouting matches, people do not have the acceptance of the other's point of view, and also the worsening in the conditions of press freedom and media freedom in many parts of the Arab world, ironically in some of the countries that witnessed the Arab Spring uprisings to end dictatorship are now relapsing back again into even more oppressive and tyrannical regimes. That, in my opinion, is curbing and negatively impacting Arab media credibility. Would you like to talk about these two particular points and how they may affect the credibility and the impact of Arab and Muslim media?
Well, I certainly agree with you. I think you hit another very important nail in this discussion. That sometimes we have not, and again, it goes back to the way we were, we evolved under oppressive conditions, the lack of free speech, the lack of press freedoms. We're only slowly finding free speech and expression, mainly through social media. But it's gone to the extreme, and this confusion has also, for example, caused many problems for Arabs in terms of the ability to have a discussion about issues that we disagree on. It is sad, and I agree with you 100%, that if you don't agree with somebody, that you become the enemy, rather than focusing on the real issue, which is the enemy, and changing it and improving it. So we tend to get into shouting matches, and we yell and scream, or we have conferences, and we only invite certain people that fit our agendas. We don't really invite people we might have some disagreement with. Now, I'm not saying that you invite, the racists and the haters, but I'm saying that there needs to be a greater diversity in our of views and opinions in our public discussions and dialogue. I think our media is a part of the problem. It comes down to some people don't like me for different reasons, and rather than looking at the issues, they want to use the other, insignificant issues. My wife happens to be Jewish. I'm not Muslim. I'm Christian. And believe it or not, in the Muslim world, that is a big deal. But we're not allowed to talk about it. Christians are not allowed to talk about the challenges that they face in a Muslim, Arab, Middle East. And when we do, we're attacked for it. So there are all kinds of these restrictions, these censorships. We become the Arab dictators. We want to control the dialogue. Instead of having an open debate and discussion, we end up having a yelling match. People take sides because it's very emotional. And when you're emotional, reason goes out the window. So if you believe in one person, you side with them. It's not based on the facts. So we get stuck accepting premises that are incomplete and inaccurate, and we wonder why, when we try to apply them, that they fail. Because when I look at Palestine and when I look at Syria and when I look at Iraq, I see a big failure. I don't see success. We have not been successful. We want to tell ourselves we have, and anybody who tries to question our failures becomes, the enemy. Worse than, I get criticized worse than they criticize the Israelis. I mean, it really, to me, as an American Arab, I was just attacked the other day because I describe myself as an American Arab. I live in America, and I want to identify with Americans, and it means something to them. So that's how I define myself. I was attacked by a group of, Arabs and journalists who said, well, that's ignorant to make Arabs choose to be Arab American or American Arab. And I said, no, it's part of the communications process. You use the right words, you use the right stereotypes, you use the right perceptions. And if you don't, you could fail. But it's an uphill struggle. I don't know how to change it except doing what we're doing. Your radio show should be all over the United States. We don't even support ourselves. I know what it's like because I have the same problem. Your radio show is phenomenal. I listen to you, and I think
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'm honored to be on the show, even though I have my own show there. But I don't think we support our community recognizes the power of what you do, what I do, what Layla does. I think our community would rather just push us aside because they're comfortable in the failure. They've turned failure into success. They've turned breadcrumbs into bread. They've accepted tragedy as a daily life. And if we don't change that, we're destined to lose. And I hate to say that because our cause is the just cause. But we can't just let the American people wake up one day and say, hey, the Arab and Muslim cause is the just cause. We have to change it. And if we don't roll up our sleeves and work hard, it's never going to change.
Absolutely. These are very important points that you just touched upon, and they definitely need new strategies, which will really compel me to ask you the question of looking ahead and moving forward. What do you see as the most important lessons that we can learn from all of the things we have been talking about today, some of the gaps, the pitfalls, the blind spots, the weaknesses? These are all, in my opinion, also opportunities to learn and to improve and to develop something different for the future. So if we were to look ahead, a future outlook in the remaining few minutes, what would you pinpoint as the most important lessons and reflections that we can come out with for the future?
The most important lesson, and if you don't mind me giving myself a plug for my book, I published a book called Power PR, which is the Ethnic Activist Guide to Strategic Communications. The fundamental message in that is that Arabs and Muslims, and this is written for the Arab and Muslim community and other ethnic groups that have been marginalized by the mainstream media in America. The most important thing is, and the first step, and the answer to your question is, we need to have a dialogue without anger and without recrimination. If you and I don't agree, we should still respect each other because we are the victims. And the victims shouldn't be arguing with other victims. Victims should be listening and understanding. We should have an open, unrestricted discussion and dialogue without the animosity that's placed on the people who raise issues that we feel uncomfortable with. We have to have an open and honest discussion about what the problems are. Until we can have an open and honest discussion where we can say some of the things that I've said on your show, where you can ask the questions and express your views, until we get there, your show is there. I really believe your show is there. But I don't believe that's the case in the Arab and Muslim community. I believe we're far from that answer, and the tendency is, oh, I don't like what he says, let's keep him out. They spend more time keeping me out than they do the same energy put to save Syrian refugees or to save Palestinians. We put more energy in silencing the people we disagree with in our own community than we do overcoming the hurdles that stand in our way. That is the number one challenge, and if we can overcome that, I think everything else falls into place that we talked about. I think everything else changes.
And I would just add to that some of the important points we have been talking about earlier today, Ray, as well. You know, the shift from politicization to more humanization, and definitely avoiding the shouting matches and having more acceptance of the other's point of view, learning more about how to address international and American public opinion, learning how to defend our own causes in our own words, defining ourselves so we don't give an opportunity to others to define who we are, and definitely working on improving the training and preparation of professional journalists of the future. I think if we try to take into account all of these important factors and all of these important points, we can hopefully see a different mindset, a different approach, and a different media strategy that would really advocate Arab causes and Muslim causes in the future.
And I would only add one quick point, the nationalism of the Arab and Muslim identity. We need to become one people again. Thank you, Sahar.
Thank you so much, Ray. I want to really thank you for this excellent insight and for being my guest today. It was a big honor, a big pleasure, and I hope to have you again on my show in the future. And I also want to thank all our listeners today. Thank you so much, everybody. This was your host, Sahar Khamis, and we would like to have you again with us very soon in another show on US Arab Radio. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.